Okay, so the next tool that we're going to be talking about is going to be our Ironworker, or you may see on our safety test or any kind of slides referred to as a power shear. All in the same. Power shear is our Ironworker. Okay, I mostly refer to it as our Ironworker. But the few things to know about the Ironworker: it's a very easy machine to get to use. But as easy as it is to be able to use the Ironworker, it's very easy to run the risk of injury. So a few things to point out when it comes to our Ironworker, and let's start by how do you turn it on, how do you operate it. First couple of switches to be able to point out here with our machine. Our on switch. Okay, of course, green means go. So, green button turns on our Ironworker. The foot pedal here, this is what's going to allow you to be able to have that hydraulic work the blade down in order to make a cut. The different cuts that this machine is able to make is a standard flat cut that we're mostly using for our flat bar, angled cuts for our angle iron, a punch attachment, so it's able to punch holes. We like using that for our sheet metal. Eliminates any risk of catching or binding with a drill bit if we're drilling or having to apply holes to any kind of sheet metal. So we have that luxury of having a punch. On this end here we have our notcher. Maybe you need to cut out a corner on a piece of flat bar. Our notcher is here for that luxury. And of course we have the switch. Depressing your foot onto the pedal allows the blade to drop and make its cut. And of course when we're done, we have the off switch. Red means stop, turns off our Ironworker. Now, a few things I need to point out when it comes to actually using our Ironworker. Cutting our metal, okay? There's this attachment right here, okay? Now it's a safety attachment and it's holding down. It's pretty much locking in. It's putting pressure onto that flat bar, holding it down, not allowing it to jump. Remember in grade school when you're using those safety scissors and you try cutting a piece of paper and those stupid pieces of paper would get bind up in those stupid scissors, those safety scissors in elementary school, so it'd fold that paper instead of cutting it? Well, that's the risk that we run when we're not using this safety attachment here. When you don't hold down that metal, what happens is that metal will actually jump, binding between the two blades of our Ironworker, because it works like a set of scissors. When that metal jumps and it binds with the two blades, what it will do with that blade is actually round it off. So you want to have a sharp blade along that Ironworker. Without that sharp blade, you can't get an effective cut. It makes it more difficult in order to cut your steel. And worse, the more difficult it is to make a cut, the more stress it has on that machine and the hydraulics doing damage to your Ironworker. So to prevent damage to your blade and to prevent damage to your Ironworker and to extend the life of your blade, lock down your material. Now, I understand that over the amount of cuts that you make, say to your flat bar, you're going to reach a point where your flat bar may get too short to the point that it gets between the blade and your guard, and the guard can't lock it down because the metal's too short, it can't reach. Here's what you can do. When you have your metal underneath your guard, first off, make sure that your guard is high enough so that way you can fit both pieces of metal. You would use one piece of metal to push the first piece of flat bar forward, so that way, you know, you're on your measurement, you're on your line in which you want to make your cut. You would then take your second piece of flat bar. For this example, I'm going to use flat bar. You would overlap. So pretty much what your metal would look like is it would look like this, where one metal is overlapping the other, okay? You will take your piece of, or your guard, you will then lock it down. Make sure it's nice and snug. Tighten it all the way down. So that way there's no risk of that flat bar jumping. Lock down that piece of metal. And that overlap is going to put pressure on that first piece of flat bar, eliminating that chance of that flat bar jumping. Now, what I tell students, if they reach that point in which they are having that flat bar get to be too short, just get a new one. Just get a new piece of flat bar. Don't run that risk of having something bind up, creating that overlap and jump of that little piece of flat bar. You never want to have that metal get to be too short to the point that it is not reaching the guard and where you have that binding between the two blades. So don't run that risk. So when it comes to our Ironworker, very easy to use. We're only using our flatter stock, angle iron, flat stock, notcher, and punch. We're never cutting any kind of round stock. The round stock puts too much stress on that blade, creating dents. And you never cut rebar on an Ironworker. So we limit our cuts to only flat stock and our angle bar. And of course, never exceed, because every Ironworker is different, never exceed the limits, like the amount, how thick the metal can be on this Ironworker, and never go beyond the width of that blade. So know what your limitations are when it comes to your Ironworker. Like for ours, we never want to go beyond for our flat bar, never extend the capacities. That's what I'm trying to say. Capacities. Never go beyond the maximum capacities when it comes to our Ironworker. And that concludes our discussion regarding our Ironworker.